Are two big Baltimore Ravens dominoes about to fall on draft day in Lamar Jackson and DeAndre Hopkins? We take a look at the latest on both Jackson and the Hopkins situation. Also, talk about the draft and who the Ravens could take at pick 22 if they stick there, and who they could be targeting in the mid and later rounds. All that and much more coming up next year on this draft day edition of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in here to another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I am your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire. We're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here with us today on draft day, making us your first listen each and every day here on Locked On Ravens. Again, you can subscribe for free, both in video form and in audio form here. In today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. If you've ever dreamed of becoming an NFL general manager and managing a football franchise, this game is definitely for you. To download the games at ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the app stores. Our listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise using the promo code Locked On in all caps in the game. And it is draft day. Again, we have been leading up to this moment for months, and here to talk about our official draft day preview, some Ravens dominoes potentially falling here today over the course of draft weekend, is Jake Louque of Exit 52. And Jake, all leading up to this moment here, we've had the Lamar Jackson saga, Odell, DeAndre Hopkins, a lot of ups and a lot of downs, a roller coaster. But how are you feeling now that we're actually here on draft day?
You know, I'm feeling good, and I can tell you're feeling a little keyed up right now, because I don't want to put you on blast. I'm sure you're going to edit it out, but there was a little bit of a false start there at the front of your opening with the R. And I was watching the Bill O'Reilly "We'll Do It Live" clip the other day, so that really got me in the right headspace, and that was great to see. So
no blast. We're gonna keep that in. We're gonna keep it in. Everything's gonna get kept in here. I'm excited to have you on, Jake, and I am excited. I mean, okay. There's a lot that I think we can talk about, but I think yesterday was like, I expect chaos throughout the course of draft weekend, but there was chaos yesterday. I mean, Lamar Jackson, DeAndre Hopkins. I want to focus first on Lamar Jackson because there have been the rumblings all off season. We've heard the reports. We don't really know much of anything, it feels like, but talking about how maybe Lamar is going to sign some sort of extension. Lamar puts out the emoji. Well, not the emoji. It was a GIF last night, the SpongeBob GIF. Odell Beckham tweeted the Bookham tweet over the course of yesterday too. So feels like something could be brewing in Baltimore. Pat McAfee, I know the Pat McAfee show has been kind of on top of the DeAndre Hopkins situation, but do you feel like Lamar could sign an extension here over the course of the next couple of days, whether it is today on draft day or over the course of draft weekends, and maybe free up some space for another big move?
I certainly wonder how they would make Hopkins happen without that, right? I mean, it just seems like they're pretty hamstrung as things stand right now. And that's sort of been the calling card the entire offseason for why they can't really make a ton of big moves. We did see them go and get Odell Beckham, but if they want to go and get a guy of this caliber, regardless of how much salary Arizona is going to eat, it does feel like you would need to clear some space. And, the Lamar extension would be the way to do that. And I mean, what a way to really put all this bad blood behind them and everything that's transpired this offseason by coming together and saying like, hey, we showed you we're pretty serious about fixing this, wide receiver position, fixing this passing game for you by signing Odell Beckham, by hiring Todd Monken. How about you come to the table, you give us a little bit more space to work with, and we'll do you one even better, and we'll go get DeAndre Hopkins. It almost feels too good to be true. But listen, I mean, there's been some legit rumblings from some very legit people that I tend to believe when they put stuff out there that the Hopkins thing is real. As far as the extension goes, that tweet, the SpongeBob GIF, that's not quite enough for me. Neither is Josina Anderson, who I do like, but, she's getting involved with the emojis and stuff too. I want to see something concrete on that front, but I am very much believing that they are still in on DeAndre Hopkins.
Yeah, and it would be amazing, all of the talk of receivers over the past couple of years and with what their room was. I mean, can you go back, Jake, to what it was like at the end of last year with bringing in Sammy Watkins for round 2, bringing in 36-year-old Deshaun Jackson, and all of a sudden you move into DeAndre Hopkins and Odell and all those guys. I think that, to me, if I'm Lamar Jackson, I'd say, all right, you get Todd Monken in there too. And a lot of people, we'll kind of get to this in the second segment too, but a lot of people want to see Lamar in that Todd Monken offense. I think a lot of people would feel robbed if they only saw him in Greg Roman and I guess Marty Morningweg at the back half of his rookie season. But if they only saw him in that Greg Roman offense, so do you think Todd Monken might have a big part in maybe getting Lamar back to Baltimore?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly could be that way. It didn't sound like he was like super invested one way or another in the offensive coordinator search when you go back and you parse through what happened there. But I don't see why not. I mean, it just seemed like, and I don't know how Lamar felt about this, but it just seemed like the Greg Roman thing very much had run its course. And if we, the fans, are sitting there thinking about it, as much as we were, then a guy whose full-time job it is, I would have to imagine, was thinking about it a lot. And I'm sure he's glad that they are moving into a different era there. And Monken, I think what he runs, it's, I wouldn't call it like the most pass happy type attack or, pass oriented type attack. There is still a lot of running incorporated into it and a lot of creative running, not to the extent of Roman, but it's going to make good usage of the personnel that they have with the tight ends that they do have with Andrews and likely, and maybe you get something out of Charlie Kohler, but that's going to open things up for the wide receivers as well. And I don't think either you or I are huge X's and O's guys, but I mean, just looking at the way Monken, I wouldn't say commanded the room, but he commanded the respect of the room during his press conference. I just think it was a good thing to see. I think he's going to relate very well to Lamar. He seems like kind of a no nonsense guy who can have a little bit of fun. Excited to see how that relationship develops for sure.
Yeah, I definitely am too. And, there's been a lot of talk, Jake, also about the Jalen Hurts situation, how that impacts Lamar, even like the trade for Aaron Rodgers from the Jets and how like a potential trade package could maybe look for Lamar. But, you get a player like Odell Beckham in. Obviously, the contract itself, I'd say, was a bit of an overpay, but a necessary one. I'm not saying it was a bad move. But now you bring in Hopkins, and you mentioned how potential, if they bring in Hopkins, it would maybe take a little bit of salary cap maneuvering. The Lamar extension, I think, is the best way to open up that. Do you feel like after all this offseason of really feeling like there's been no middle ground, it feels like, Lamar's set in what he wants, the Ravens are set in what they want to give? It doesn't feel like a couple million each way where one will go up or the other will go down. Do you think the possibility of maybe adding Hopkins would have Lamar potentially saying, all right, maybe I'm willing to come off the number a little bit to get there, to get Hopkins in? Or do you feel like this is still purely like a money thing? He's not going to come down off of that?
Yeah, I if you had asked me a week ago, I probably would say the latter, but with all the rumblings that we're hearing over the last 24, 48 hours, maybe he will. And with the Jalen Hurts thing too, maybe he will, because look what happened with the Eagles last year when Hurts, there were certainly questions about him and whether he was going to be a franchise guy heading into the season. I'm glad that the Eagles gave him a chance to stick around, but not only did they give him a chance, they set him up for success by making all the moves that they did. They got Devontae Smith 2 years ago. They went out and got A.J. Brown last year during the draft. Could this be a situation where the Ravens make a move for a similar type player, obviously further along in his career in Hopkins, but could we see that happen maybe on draft day? It certainly seems like if it's going to happen, then it's going to be happening on draft day. So it could be an interesting parallel there. And maybe Lamar could say, you know what, I'm tired of the drama and I saw what Jalen just signed for. That's not going to help my leverage. Let's just get this thing done. And unless he truly doesn't want to be in Baltimore or he is just so dead set on the money, maybe it finally will happen and it will be great to see.
Right. And I know that there's been a lot of press about what Jalen Hurts had to say about, I can't remember the exact quote. It was like, money's great, but championships are better or something like that. There's been a lot of that press about Jalen. It's like, oh, why doesn't Lamar think that way? Lamar wants to win. Lamar wants to win championships. Again, he went on the shop with LeBron James. I've mentioned this multiple times on my show where he says, he wants to be a billionaire and he wants to be a champion. He wants to win championships. And to me, that is who Lamar is. And I think bringing in a player like DeAndre Hopkins would certainly help that. But you're kind of looking at the quarterback market, at least what it has been since Deshaun Watson signed his deal, Jake. And we've had about 10 quarterbacks sign deals or sign extensions. Not one has come even really close to what Deshaun Watson got. So at this point, do you still think, Jake, there's an avenue for Lamar to get that fully guaranteed deal if he maybe holds out to next year and sees what Joe Burrow or Justin Herbert or Trevor Lawrence gets? Or do you think the Deshaun Watson deal is very clearly an outlier and that's not going to happen?
Yeah, I really struggle to see it happening. I mean, you're talking about one of the more player-friendly, take care of their guys organizations in the league with the Ravens. That is not hyperbole at all. I mean, guys request trades, they acquiesce, they pay their homegrown players. It's what they're all about, and they just haven't been willing to do it. And I mean, maybe you get who is it that owns the Chargers? I think Spanos doing that for Justin Herbert. I couldn't see it. He strikes me as a little bit cheap. And I certainly could not see Mike Brown doing it with Joe Burrow over in Cincinnati. He's definitely on the mom and pop side of things a little bit there. So I don't know, man. He could try, but I just don't see it in the cards for him.
Yeah, and I mean, look, I think Lamar can definitely increase his value. I think, look, he was playing like an MVP the first 3 weeks of the season last year, and then we kind of saw the struggles. He gets injured. There's an opportunity for Lamar to increase his money if he plays, let's say, on a 1 year deal or on the franchise tag this year. But I think it makes a lot of sense with the rumblings, as you talked about, where if Lamar signs his extension, you don't have to go through the cap gymnastics of restructuring a Ronnie Stanley or restructuring a Mark Andrews or a Marlon Humphrey. Lamar extension, depending on what the money looks like, how it's all sorted, could be enough to get DeAndre Hopkins into Baltimore. And coming up, we'll talk about the latest rumblings on DeAndre Hopkins, why it looks more realistic than I think it has in a while here to get him into Baltimore. We'll talk about what the fit could be as well. So be sure to stay tuned. A ton to dive into on this draft day edition of Locked On Ravens. But first, today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. And you're free to talk about this mobile game app a ton. And if you've ever thought you'd make a good GM, you got to give this game a try. It's not as easy as you might think to create a dynasty. When you play Ultimate Football GM, you can control and manage every strategic aspect of your team as you play through seasons and lead your team to glory if you're trying to build a historic dynasty. And there's so much you can do in this game. You can make a ton of good and bad decisions roster-wise, and whatever you do could lead to very big consequences. And once you download the game, you don't even need Wi-Fi to play. And also, if you have friends or family, you can play with them today. With Ultimate Football GM, you're responsible for controlling the destiny of your franchise by hiring the right coaches and coordinators, managing all the finances, including negotiating player salaries and terms to navigate your franchise through free agency, the draft, injuries, player personnel issues, and all the ups and downs of the season. All this in a challenging and realistic game. Roll Ultimate Football GM is completely free and playable offline, play on the go as you want and when you want to. Locked On Ravens listeners get a 100% free boost of their franchise. Use the promo code Locked On in all caps in the game store. That's Locked On in all caps. Make sure to check it out today. It's on the games at ultimate-gm.com or look up on the app stores. That's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM, start your dynasty today. We're back. Our second segment, Locked On Ravens here. Kevin Allstriker still here with Jake Louque of Exit 52. And Jake, the DeAndre Hopkins, I don't want to call it a saga because it hasn't been, but the situation with Baltimore, it's picked up steam over the course of the past couple of weeks here. Even after Odell signed, I think a lot of people saw the Odell signing and were like, all right, that's their one big veteran move. There were rumblings about Hopkins before that, about Cortland Sutton and what that could have been. But now we're getting some legitimate rumblings. Adam Pac-Man Jones, how much of a source you classify him as, I think varies depending on who you talk to. But Rita Hubbard, who's a friend of this show, and I trust a great deal. I mean, she is someone who is connected and has been right on a lot of things. She said that a Hopkins deal, I believe what she said was it was close. Now, that does not mean it is happening. Things can change. But to me, I think that's a pretty good indication of just where the situation is. I know that the Bills and the Chiefs have also been mentioned. But where's your, I know Glenn Clark does the Lamar-o-meter. Where's your Hopkins-o-meter right now in terms of how likely this could be, especially now today on draft day?
I'd probably go with a solid 40%. I mean, it's hard to get super, super jazzed up about this stuff. We've seen this kind of stuff happen with the Ravens before. And like I said, it's got that kind of too good to be true vibes after they already went and got Odell. It would be really hard to see them continuing to just swipe the credit card like we have seen them with the void years and with signing Beckham this offseason. But maybe they have turned over a new leaf in their regard. And I've been saying this. I mean, really, I've been saying this for a long time now. It's time to turn over that new leaf. It's time to fix this position. It's time to bring it into the 21st century, really. I mean, and I mentioned this on our podcast, maybe last night, 2 nights ago. It was embarrassing watching this wide receiver room at times last season. And it's nothing against the guys that were out there. They should have never been put in that position in the first place. And it's just they tried to do the draft thing. Credit to Eric. He tried to draft guys in the first round and the second day in a way that Ozzie Newsome had stopped trying to do, but it didn't work out. And it's time to go fix it. And it's time to go do it with proven professional options. And you've got one in house now who I think was a great move. And it sounds like, you know what vibe I get, Kevin? I feel like Hopkins wants to come to Baltimore. That's what I feel like. Like Pac-Man Jones is talking directly to DeAndre Hopkins, by the way. That's his source. Right. So if he's going on to Pat McAfee and saying that, that's me thinking that he's putting that out there for a good reason. So that's kind of what I'm feeling. I feel like Hopkins wants to make it happen. And the financials aren't the easiest thing in the world, especially with Jackson not signed. But yeah, nice solid 40%. Hopefully something concrete comes out soon. But, it feels like you do some wriggling and wrangling. Maybe you can make something work. Maybe you do some sort of a pick swap where you give up your first round pick and then the Cardinals give you their second and Hopkins. That would give the Ravens a second round pick, but they would give up that first and they would get Hopkins with it. And then maybe Arizona takes on a certain amount of the salary. And then Lamar Jackson signs an extension and our fan fiction is fulfilled and everyone cracks a beer and we have a great weekend.
Yeah, that's the ultimate dream. I mean, did you see the Hopkins video? I think it was a couple weeks ago. It was someone asking, I think, for him to respond in like facial expressions, and he was asked about, I think it was the Chiefs, the Bills, the Patriots, and one I can't remember who the other team was. He did like good reactions to the Chiefs and the Bills, and then a bad reaction to the Patriots and another team, but he wasn't asked about the Ravens. And I'm like, how do you take that opportunity and not ask him about a team that he's been linked to? So I would, if I had to guess, I would say that he would have reacted in a good way to Baltimore. And I think it would be good for both him and the Ravens. I mean, it looks like the Ravens, they could maneuver the cap space to have like one more big move, whether it is a receiver like Hopkins, if you want to bring in a corner. Do you think that if they were to make the move for Hopkins, you'd be okay with that as their big move, especially considering, look, some of the negatives I know people have talked about, the age, and he missed the games last year because of the suspension. He's soon to be 31. I also think he's a heck of a player, though, and he'd help the offense. What do you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, it's like that, or like Nelson Aguilar is your other big move, right? Like I'm down for adding good players to my football team. And yeah, he's had the injury issues and the suspension thing. I'm not really worried about the suspension. It feels like once you get popped for that kind of thing one time, that's kind of over. So you have that. The injuries are a concern, but I don't know, man. You sign him and all of a sudden you got a pretty deep freaking room, don't you? With Aguilar, with Bateman, with Beckham, with Duvernay, if they hang on to him, and I hope they do, because I do like what I've seen out of him. I've always been a big Devin Duvernay fan. So, yeah, man. I mean, like, if the question is, do you sign him even considering the drawbacks? I do it without hesitating. And, like, I know that's not the answer that everyone wants to hear, or everyone that's being kind of performatively pragmatic is the way that I would put it. Like, let's come on, guys. We've had this problem with this position for a quarter of a century now. Let's just go fix it. This guy would do it. Let's get it done.
And it's crazy to think now that if the Ravens do pull this off and get him, I think the conversation would shift to like the Ravens haven't had any receivers. Well, not any, but they've had barely any in the last 4 or 5, however many years you want to go back. So is the room almost overcrowded because of guys you mentioned? Like, we haven't even talked about Rashad Bateman and like what he brings. That's like, depending on where you put him in, he could be anywhere from year 1 to year 3. Devin Duvernay's year 4. Aguilar's year 5. I mean, would you have to move on from one of those guys if they brought in Hopkins? Do you feel like Baltimore would have to do that, or could you just keep them all?
I think you keep them all. I mean, you go Hopkins 1, Beckham 2, Bateman 3, Aguilar 4, or, Duvernay 4, depending on, and there's 5. And then I guess you draft a guy and you got 6. I mean, I'm totally fine with carrying 6 receivers. I think they get themselves in trouble by not having enough depth at the position. We've seen it however many times. So, I mean, not only would this be a great signing for the top of the room, but they're kind of lacking depth right now when you really look at it. Like James Prochet, man, that is not worked out. Tylan Wallace, that has not worked out, I think, for a variety of reasons, but they're still kind of thin at the position a little bit when you really kind of take a look at this. So I'd be perfectly fine with it from a depth perspective too.
I think James Prochet might be playing like 8D chess with us too, with the numbers, where like he could get too big. Like he already got whatever he got from Odell, whether that is just, I'm not going to speculate on what it was, but I'm sure it was a lot. And then maybe Hopkins comes in, wants to take the 10 from him, and he switches again and he gets another one. I mean, I give credit to James Prochet because I don't think it's worked out in the field based off of what a lot of people were expecting. Obviously a 6th round pick, or 7th, one of the two. But to me, I think that he's a guy that he was acting as sometimes as like the 3 or the 2 last year because of the injuries that they went through, the lack of addressing the position. If you have him as the 6, I like that a lot more considering. But let's talk a bit about what the compensation could be, Jake. You mentioned a really interesting package. It's been, I think, floated by a lot of people. Maybe it is 22 for 34 in Hopkins. I think that comes out to what, like a early to mid 3rd rounder, all things considered. Would you be okay with that compensation, or what would you more be looking for if not?
No, I think I'd be fine with that. I think that's pretty much what they gave up for Anquan Bolden, over 10 years ago at this point. Hopkins has been in the league for 10, 11 years, and that's probably around the same age that Bolden was when they made that move. And this feels like what that move would be to me a little bit, where maybe Bateman is kind of your Torrey Smith type figure, and then Beckham is they probably didn't have an equivalent at the time, but I mean, he's just kind of another very solid receiver to bring into the room. I guess Beckham could be the Derek Mason type. And so you'd have 2 very solid veteran receivers, and 3rd round pick. I would give that up for DeAndre Hopkins, even now, 100%. So I'd be perfectly fine with that compensation.
Yeah, I think I would too. And the Bolden deal, I think you're right, was either that, or I think it was a 3rd and a 4th. So right around, I think the same value of what it would be. You're bringing in another Cardinals receiver, And the Ravens and Cardinals have had their dealings with the Marquise Brown trade. Now they would maybe get Hopkins back, but Brown fits their timeline better now. I mean, the Cardinals are weird. I mean, their defense is horrendous. They need to add some type of defensive help at 3 if they don't trade out of that pick. But with Kyler coming off the ACL, whenever that is, I just don't think Hopkins fits their realistic timeline anymore, which is why it would be either Baltimore or Kansas City or Buffalo. So on that same vein, Jake, what would it do to you if, we've had all this Ravens talk, the potential Hopkins deal today, and he goes to Kansas City or Buffalo? I mean, what would you be feeling in that moment?
Yeah, no, that would be tough. And it would be alleviated if they do get a solid wide receiver option that I'm into. At least, I mean, it would probably have to be in the first round, honestly, maybe a Smith and Jigba or a Jordan Addison or something like that. It would be tough, but like I said, I'm not selling myself on this all the way quite yet. I believe Rita believes that it is close, and for good reason. I think she's a well-sourced person, and I tend to trust her. But we've seen things happen with this franchise, with this position, to the point where you had a guy literally be traded here and then decide that he didn't want to come here, and the deal got scuttled. And shout out to Terrell Owens. But hopefully something like that doesn't happen. But if he goes elsewhere, he goes elsewhere. I'm not going to totally lose sleep over it, because that's just the way that NFL dealings can work sometimes. But I would prefer to at least avoid that scenario.
Yeah, I mean, look, literally a couple weeks ago, just Rebeck reported the Cortland Sutton deal was all but finalized with him coming to Baltimore. And then the Broncos said, never mind, we want to keep him. So goodbye. Yep. So those things can happen where something could be at the finish line on the doorstep, and then all of a sudden everything falls apart. So maybe something is close now, but again, I don't think the Ravens are the only team in on this situation. So I think I said yesterday it was 30-70 that Hopkins came to Baltimore versus he didn't. I'd call it 50-50 now. I'll just go a full 50-50 shot. I think it does seem like, I agree with you, Jake, he wants to be a member of the Ravens, but I think he wouldn't mind going to Buffalo. He wouldn't mind going to Kansas City. So we'll have to see who ponies up for Arizona, gives them the compensation they want. Obviously, they're not going to get a first rounder at this point. I wouldn't even think. I think a third is very good value for what Arizona could get. So if it is 22 for Hopkins and 34, I'd be down with that 100%. I mean, another option that they could do if it's not 22 for Hopkins and 34 would be, would it be 22 and Patrick Queen for Hopkins 34 and maybe another third in there? Would you do that?
Yeah, maybe, if they want to go to a fourth even, I think I would do that, honestly.
Would Queen move a needle for you defensively for Arizona?
I think it has to. I mean, Jonathan Gannon, I'm not super familiar with his defense, but I believe they drafted that linebacker high in Philly last year, didn't they? Or maybe in the third round, that buzzy guy. I forget.
Yeah, Nakobe Dean.
Yeah, Nakobe Dean. So, yeah, maybe he does value linebackers like that. And, I mean, Queen is I think he showed out last season, man. I think he's earned himself a little bit of a more prominent role, and I think he would step in as a leader on that defense right away. So
yeah, I think outside of Lamar, player-wise, Queen is probably the most realistic guy that could get you the most. And it's not like I don't want Patrick Queen in Baltimore. I think it'd be great if things were able to work out with him. But the reality of the situation is they just signed Roquan Smith to that huge deal. Can they really afford to sign Queen? I think Queen's going to get a big deal. So can they afford to sign 2 linebackers? I don't think it's necessarily Baltimore doesn't like Queen, but in the event that he was traded, I would maybe just think it's Smith is there. He's their guy. And they just decide to move on from Queen because they can't afford to sign 2 linebackers to that big of a deal. What do you think?
Yeah, no. And I mean, I think you're probably doing him a little bit of a favor, honestly, too, where he started to play well last season, even before Smith showed up, and nobody wanted to notice that or give him any credit. And then Smith shows up, and it's like, oh, Roquan Smith got there. Of course, he started playing better. And I like Patrick a lot. I know he takes a lot of that stuff to heart. So I think it will be a cool opportunity for him to build up his stock a little bit, build up his chickens and his mentals there in Arizona as the leader of that defense.
Yeah, I think ideally for me, I wouldn't start negotiations if it's just Queen's value for anything less than a second, because if you let him walk next year, whenever he walks, you could get a third compensatory pick back for him. And I'd rather have him and Roquan Smith together to have Queen on that cheap deal. But if it helps to get a DeAndre Hopkins, if that's what Arizona says, we're not doing the deal without Patrick Queen, in that case, I'd probably say, you can probably throw him in and then either draft a linebacker in the third or the fourth or sign somebody. So I think there are avenues, and it's really interesting considering all the different packages there could be here. But coming up next, Locked On Ravens here, our final segment, we'll be talking about the draft because it is draft day, by the way. So we'll be talking about some prospects, who the Ravens could take at 22, potential trade back scenarios, and official predictions. So be sure to stay tuned. Lots to dive into still on Locked On Ravens. But first, this episode is brought to you by Built Bar. And if you're looking for a delicious snack but don't want all the sugar and calories, then you need the best tasting protein bar ever in Built. And if you're like me, you want to make healthier snack choices, don't want to compromise the taste, then I've got just the thing for you with Built Bars and Built Puffs. Built Bars are healthy and taste amazing, and they taste so amazing, you won't even think they're that good for you. You really have to try these. What makes Built Bars so good is, for starters, they're covered in 100% real chocolate, and they come in unbelievable flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, and cookies and cream. They're only 130 calories and have 4 grams of sugar with a whopping 17 grams of protein. And I don't even need to wait to get a box. For years I've been talking about ordering Built Bars at Built.com, but now you can get them at your local Walmart or Sam's Club, while you can still get them in your specialty flavors at Built.com. That's right. Head to your nearest Walmart today, walk to the pharmacy section, and grab yourself a box of Built Bars. You can pick up a 4-bar box of cookies and cream bar, double chocolate bar, or coconut puff. And if you're close to a Sam's Club, run in and grab a 13-bar box with hit flavors such as brownie batter puff and churro puff. You can thank me later. We are back. Draft day here. Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with Jake Louque, and we'll be streaming here on Locked On Ravens. I will all 3 days after the draft. So right after the draft ends on Thursday night here today, we'll be talking about who the Ravens picked or what they made, what moves. Then we'll do the second round, third round on Friday. We'll do that Friday evening after those 2 rounds. Then obviously Saturday evening after 4, 5, 6, or 7. Jake, you're streaming too with Exit 52, aren't you?
Yes, sir. We're getting it fired up, I think, right around 8 p.m. And we're just going to be rolling through most of the night. I don't know how much longer we're going to be sticking around after they pick. But yeah, recording through the whole thing, getting some guests on. Sounds like you might be able to make an appearance on there as well. So any listeners, you can check out our stream. Like I said, we'll just kind of be running it all night. We'll live record our podcast and our reaction to whatever happens, because who knows what's going to happen, whether they pick or trade back or whatever it is. Yeah, just be sure to check us out.
Yeah, so all the links to that will obviously be in the description below, and you can obviously subscribe here as well if you want our streams after the draft there. So a ton of people are doing live streams, a ton of great content out there, Ravens-wise for sure. But Jake, the Ravens have 22 right now. It's a pick that I think the Ravens can do a lot with. They could either stick and pick there. I think there will be players that will fall to them there that you might think, well, why is this guy here? It's almost like Kyle Hamilton last year, where everyone thought he was a top 10 pick, and then the run of receivers happens and he falls into the Ravens' laps. Seems to a lot of people, myself included. I mean, the 2 needs for me, corner and wide receiver. I think the wide receiver need is alleviated a little bit with the Odell signing. So I kind of focus on corner. But where are you kind of looking for what Baltimore could do there at 22 and what you prefer?
Yeah, I think corner and receiver are definitely the big ones. I mean, like you definitely think about the edge position a little bit. I think you have to, if like a Nolan Smith or somebody like that starts to fall. But yeah, a lot of good options at corner and at receiver. So I guess you hope that there isn't too big a run on either of them. But you look at a Joey Porter, you look at a Deontay Banks on the cornerback side of things. Both those guys seem to be very highly regarded. And then wide receiver, man, a lot of good options. I think Addison, I already mentioned, a Maryland native. I think he grew up a Ravens fan, maybe, if I'm not mistaken. And then Smith and Jigba out of Ohio State is another guy that I've been kind of looking at as well.
Yeah, there are those. And I think, to me, I don't know if you agree, Jake, I want to ask you about it, is this isn't necessarily a super top-heavy draft to me where there are like all these stars at the beginning. It's more once you hit the middle of the first round, like maybe like the middle of the first to the end of the third. So like middle of day 1 to end of day 2, there are going to be a lot of guys where you could see maybe a first round guy drop to the end of the second, or a guy who you thought could be a mid-round second pick go in the first, like all of these varying positional rankings, where I think Baltimore could get like a couple of top 15 guys to fall to them at 22, but there's so much, I guess, depth in the early-ish to mid-ish part of this draft where I feel confident in the Ravens getting a really solid player to at both 22 and 86 at this point.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's probably not the best year to not have a second round pick in that regard, but that kind of, it does make me think, will they trade down a little bit? But it's also, it does take 2 to tango, as Eric DaCosta has said recently. So do people want to trade up for some of these players that are going to be available in that 22 range? We can really only wait and see, but something tells me they are going to be attempting to trade back, because not only do they not have the second round pick, but they are kind of lacking for picks relative to their usual year.
Yeah, and that's where I wanted to go next, because you know what it reminds me of, Jake? It reminds me of, well, it was 2019 when the Ravens traded up in 2018 to get Lamar. They had to give up the second round in 2019, and there were all these players who they just could not pick because they didn't have a second rounder. Eric McCoy, the Saints, was one of those. And I think after that draft, sometime after, and Eric DeCosta said, yeah, it was really hard to not have a second round pick. And then they did it again in 2021 when, it was Creed Humphrey and Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. They didn't have a second round pick then. So it's like this draft now, it's that same vein where, again, there could,
like he said, man, it really sucked not having one. I'm never going to do that again. And then he done it twice within 5 years. And it's funny because like Ozzie did that to him his first time. That was his first ever draft. Right. And he's like, never want to do that again. And now here we are. It's been, 2 other times since then.
Yeah. And look, I will say, if Roquan Smith is your second round pick, like, he is 10 times the player you want a second round pick to be. Obviously, extension and everything. That's
our friends over at BaltimoreRavens.com running the Twitter account. You can bet money that in the second round we select linebacker Roquan Smith. That tweet is coming.
Yeah, I'm with you. If they had a FanDuel prop for that, I'd be all over it, because didn't Denver do that with Russell Wilson?
I think do that. I actually saw somebody like kind of tongue in cheek say that the Bears should do that with Chase Claypool. I got a good kick out of that.
That trade was still, it should have been the Ravens second rounder that the Steelers got.
It kind of funny how that worked out.
Yeah, not in the Bears' favor, but they got DJ Moore at the end of the day, so I guess it's fine. But I know with what the Ravens are currently looking at, corner is one where, like, it's Marlon Humphrey and then Brandon Stevens, Jalen Armour-Davis, Pepe Williams. You need to have some different options there. When you hit 22, you could see maybe Joey Porter Jr. be there. Deonte Banks, a player like a Cam Smith, Emmanuel Forbes, I think, has worked his way into that first round conversation. Do you have any favorites in the corner class?
I got to be honest. I haven't dug into watching a ton of guys as much as I usually do each year. This draft just kind of hasn't had a ton of buzz for me, but I mean, I have watched Joey Porter Jr. a little bit on TV. My brother-in-law is a big Penn State guy, so I've gotten a little bit of a scouting report on him, and it seems like he has a good attitude, which I like. Banks, I've seen a little bit just following Maryland here and there, and he does kind of seem just like that feisty Maryland player, but the Ravens, never draft them for some reason outside of Torrey Smith. So that would be nice, but we'll see what happens on that regard. Other guys I haven't gotten too deep into. Cam Smith, I only know a little bit because he shares the name of what used to be one of my favorite golfers. So yeah, that's the other connection there for me with Cam Smith. But that would be fun, I guess. And then I don't know. How are you feeling on the draft this year? How are you feeling about the amount of buzz? Because it's felt a little more dead to me than usual.
Yeah, I think it's because, like, at least in my eyes, it's not top heavy. Like, there isn't like that polarizing like top 10 where every single pick is going to be like everyone knows what it is. So like, I think Bryce Young will probably go 1. Like, that feels like what it's going to be. I think Stroud should be the next player off the board, but who in the world knows what Houston is doing with that pick at 2? It could be anyone, but it just doesn't seem like there's a lot of necessarily pure like top end. This guy's 100% going to be a top 10 player at his position talent. And to me, I think that has taken away the buzz for some, which is why I think it's more of like once you get to the middle of the first round, you just kind of there's just a bunch of guys. You can glob them all up and say, well, this guy could go either at 15 or at 45, or he could go at 25 or 50. And so to me, that's where it is. But I think once you hit that glob of players, you're guaranteed to get, I think, a solid guy with star potential. And I also think with the Ravens, they're just the 2 big needs, like corner and wide receiver. We've been talking about them for months. I know you have also, Jake, where, it just seems like that's the obvious selection, but then the Ravens always go BPA. So then there's like the Bijan Robinson question, which is like, if Bijan Robinson is there at 22, honestly, I don't even know if he is at this point. I think a team might take him before the Ravens, but if he is, I mean, would you take him?
I personally wouldn't. I've just and I love him as a player. Absolutely love him as a player. I'm just so I just can't do the running back in the first round thing, unfortunately. And he's amazing and all that good stuff. But especially for the Ravens, if there's a good corner or a good wide receiver, even one of either, you got to take that one. I think the whole best player available thing. I love it. It's gotten them to some very good places, but it needs to be modified a little bit more for positional value. And I think they've done a good job of that in recent years. So I don't want to bag on them too much for a move that they haven't even made yet. But yeah, I personally wouldn't, and I don't really see them doing it either. I think they like J.K. Dobbins, and I think they want to give J.K. Dobbins a chance this year. Gus Edwards also going to be coming back healthier than he was on an affordable contract. And it's let's let's patch up some of the other holes in the ship before we go and worry about getting a brand new sail and Bijan Robinson to carry this offense. Like it would be a lot of fun. It would be really cool, but I'm personally not really about it.
No, I agree with you. I think this should be JK's offense, or at least as much as it could be with Gus Edwards also in there. I know you have to give him carries too. But I do want to raise you an interesting question because historically, Jake, the Ravens have not paid running backs. And if Dobbins goes out there like I think he will and have a huge year in 2023, especially if he's fully healthy, do you think if he's asking for a somewhat big running back contract, do you think Baltimore would pony up and give him the money? Or do you think they'd let him walk and kind of go with what they've historically done at the position?
Yeah, no, I think they'd probably just do what they'd historically done. And I think that was probably always the plan when they picked him in the second round was, we'll see what this guy has on his rookie contract. And, let's not worry about it too much beyond that. And I hope he does earn himself a contract somewhere. I don't necessarily see it being here, to your point. But honestly, we'll see what happens with their cap situation. If Jackson does sign a long-term extension or if he, God forbid, goes elsewhere. It just kind of feels impossible to answer right now in that respect.
Yeah. And I hope they do, but for players like a Queen who you want to keep around probably, but maybe just can't because of the Lamar situation. And I don't want to make it like I'm blaming Lamar for everything that's happened this offseason because I think it's had an impact. Like I think there have been ripple effects from the situation. But for example, like with Calais Campbell, to say it's all Lamar's fault, it's like everything. I don't think that's exactly accurate, but I do think it played a part. Like I do think there is a part of that happened there. And part of it is the fact that, look, Lamar and that $32.4 million cap hit, it's not a small cap hit. So hopefully the Ravens will be able to figure it out.
People get emotional about that. We're literally just talking about the facts of the situation. And then, people will come back with the retort of like, oh, well, he would have signed if they had, surrounded him with better talent. Like, maybe you're right. I mean, I don't know, but it's literally where they're at right now. We're just assessing the facts as they are in front of us.
Yep, 100%. And I know that now with the Ravens, this is an opportunity for them. They really can improve their roster. I think round out a lot of the roster holes they still have. So for your official prediction, Jake, if you had to give a player that you think Baltimore's going to take, if you want to go the trade back route, it's totally an acceptable answer. What's your final 2023 draft prediction here for draft day?
Stick and pick Jordan Addison, USC. I don't know. That feels like a good connection to me. But I'm sure I'm going to be wrong when this always happens where we always think, oh, well, they'll have, one of these two wide receivers or, two of these three wide receivers are going to fall their way. And then there's a run on receivers in the tens and the early teens that everyone seems to not see coming because we always forget that teams overvalue the hell out of this position. So I don't know. That's my prediction. I'm sure it's going to be wrong. And I guess we'll see in 4 hours here.
Yeah, I know Spencer also did Jordan Addison. I picked him in our Network Mind mock draft. So I'm going to stay true to it. I'm going to stick with it. I'm going to say Jordan Addison. Also, I'm going to agree with you, Jake. I will say corner-wise, if it's a corner, I'll make a bold prediction and say Joey Porter Jr. falls to him, and that's who they pick. Obviously, John Harbaugh talked about him at the so-called Liars Luncheon, and so how much of that is smoke, how much of it isn't. But I think if he's there, you take him. That's like a no-brainer to me in that aspect. But I think we will see the Ravens come out with at least one wide receiver, at least one corner when draft weekend is all said and done. And maybe they do trade back and pick up an extra second or a third in that conversation too. But Jake, I appreciate you. Thanks so much for hopping on here. I know you're going to be streaming over at Exit 52, but tell people where they can find you and what else you're working on.
Yeah, anytime, buddy. Thanks for having me on. You can find that at the Exit 52 YouTube channel. And then you can find me on Twitter at Jake Louque. That's Louque. Our podcast account is at Exit 52 Podcast. That's on Twitter and Instagram. So check us out there. And just doing our thing, pumping out content. We do a little bit of Ravens, do some Orioles, just do whatever the heck we feel like talking about. And it's always a good time. So check us out.
I know there's some golf content over there as well, as Jake alluded to there with Cam Smith. So if you are a golf fan, Jake has something over there for you as well. But all that'll be in the description below. And again, we'll be live streaming today, tomorrow, and Saturday after the draft is over. So you want to trickle in after that. You see the draft is up. We'll be live streaming and recapping everything the Ravens have done over the course of those 3 days. Plus, obviously, a show tomorrow, recapping day one for Baltimore, still Monday through Friday here on Locked On Ravens. So that's all I have for you here today on the show. Thank you so much for tuning in. When we get back here tomorrow, we'll be recapping everything the Ravens did on day one. So be sure to stay tuned for that. And I'll see you right back here later today, later tonight for the live stream, and obviously tomorrow for a 6 a.m. show.